The Yakuza did not just appear out of nowhere. Their roots run deep into Japanese history, going back to the Edo period, which lasted from 1603 to 1868. This was a time of strict social classes. The early Yakuza came from two main groups of outcasts. One group was the Bakuto, who were illegal gamblers. They ran dice games in small towns and along major roads. The name Yakuza itself comes from a losing hand in a card game. Ya, which is 8, Q, which is 9, and Za, which is 3. This adds up to 20, which is a worthless score. It was a self-deprecating name, a way of saying they were useless members of society. These groups developed their own codes and rituals, like elaborate tattoos and the practice of yubitsume, or finger cutting, to atone for mistakes. The other group was the tekiya, who were peddlers and merchants. They sold goods, often of questionable quality, at festivals and markets. Unlike the gamblers, the tekiya were a bit more organized. They formed groups to protect their turf and control the stalls at local events. They created a kind of shadow government for the markets, settling disputes and providing security for a fee. This was an early form of a protection racket. The tekiya learned how to manage territories and people, skills that would become very important later on. They weren't seen as noble samurai, but they had a place in the social order, even if it was on the very edge of it. They offered a sense of belonging to those who had none. These two groups, the gamblers and the peddlers, eventually started to merge. They shared a similar lifestyle, living outside the strict rules of mainstream Japanese society. They both operated in the gray areas of the law, and needed to be organized to survive. They developed a strong sense of loyalty within their groups, built around a father-son relationship known as the Oyabun-Kobun system. The Oyabun, or boss, was the father, and his followers, the Kobun, were his children. This structure demanded absolute loyalty and obedience. In return, the boss provided protection, work, and a place in the world. This family-like structure was the foundation upon which the modern Yakuza syndicates would be built. Over time, these loose groups became more structured. They weren't just collections of outcasts anymore. They were becoming organized criminal enterprises. They controlled gambling dens, managed festival markets, and offered protection to local businesses. They saw themselves as honorable outlaws, following a code of chivalry they called Ninkyo-do, or the chivalrous way. They claimed to help the weak and fight injustice, a romantic image they cultivated carefully. While there was some truth to this, they were also criminals who used intimidation and violence to get what they wanted. Their journey from simple gamblers and merchants to organized crime syndicates was a long one, setting the stage for their explosive growth in the 20th century. The end of World War II in 1945 left Japan in ruins. The government was in shambles, the police were weak, and the economy had collapsed. This chaos was the perfect environment for crime to flourish. The old Bakuto and Tekiya groups were still around, but a new, more violent type of gangster emerged. The Gurentai. These were street thugs and war veterans who were aggressive and had no respect for the old traditions. They were not bound by the romantic codes of the past. They saw an opportunity in the post-war desperation and seized it with both hands. They were brutal, pragmatic, and perfectly suited for the lawless times. The American occupation forces were focused on rebuilding Japan and demilitarizing the country. They didn't have the resources or the local knowledge to deal with street-level crime effectively. This left a power vacuum that the Gurentai and the traditional Yakuza groups rushed to fill. They took control of the black markets that sprang up everywhere. Food, clothing, and other essential goods were scarce, and these gangs controlled the supply. If you wanted to eat, you often had to deal with them. They became the unofficial rulers of the streets, providing a twisted kind of order where the official government could not. They were the ones who could get things done, for a price. This period was crucial for the Yakuza's growth. They weren't just running gambling dens anymore. They were involved in everything. They provided illegal entertainment, ran prostitution rings, and offered security services. They worked with, and sometimes against, the Allied forces. In some cases, conservative politicians even used the Yakuza to suppress leftist labor unions and student protesters. This gave the gangs a degree of political legitimacy they had never had before. They were no longer just criminals. They were seen by some as a necessary evil, a tool to maintain a certain kind of order in a deeply disordered society. The money from the black markets and other rackets was enormous. The gangs used this money to expand their operations and recruit new members. The Gurentai were eventually absorbed into the larger, more traditional Yakuza syndicates. Leaders like Yoshio Kodama, a powerful right-wing figure with wartime intelligence connections, helped bridge the gap between the criminal underworld and the political elite. This fusion of old-school organization and post-war aggression created the modern Yakuza. They were now more powerful, wealthier, and better connected than ever before, ready to become a major force in Japan's economic recovery. As Japan began its incredible economic recovery in the 1950s and 60s, the Yakuza evolved right along with it. They were smart enough to see that the real money was no longer just in street-level crime. The big prize was the legitimate economy. The gangs started to move away from being just thugs and became what we now call corporate Yakuza or Kizai Yakuza. They took the vast profits they had made from their post-war rackets and began investing them in legitimate businesses. This was a major shift in their strategy. Instead of just extorting money from companies, they started owning them. Their first major move was into the construction and real estate industries. Japan was rebuilding itself, and there was a huge demand for construction projects. The Yakuza started their own construction companies, or took control of existing ones. They used their influence to secure public works contracts, often through bribery and intimidation. They also controlled the supply of day laborers, giving them immense power over any construction site. If you wanted a building put up on time without any problems, you often had to go through them. This became a massive source of income and allowed them to launder their illegal profits into the legitimate economy. The Yakuza also became experts in a practice called sokaya. These were corporate racketeers. A gang would buy a small number of shares in a large company, which gave them the right to attend shareholder meetings. They would then dig up embarrassing information about the company's executives or their families. They would threaten to reveal this information and disrupt the shareholder meeting unless they were paid off. Most companies wanting to avoid public scandal would quietly pay. This was a highly effective form of extortion that preyed on the Japanese corporate culture of saving face at all costs. It was clean, quiet, and incredibly profitable. This move into the corporate world made the Yakuza more powerful than ever. They were no longer just gangsters. They were businessmen with powerful connections in politics, finance, and industry. They ran entertainment districts, controlled real estate development, and had their hands in the stock market. They were a shadow economy operating in parallel with the legitimate one. This made them much harder for the police to fight. How do you arrest a man who owns a legitimate company, has powerful friends, and commits his crimes behind the closed doors of a boardroom? The Yakuza had successfully integrated themselves into the very fabric of Japan's economic miracle. The 1980s in Japan were the years of the bubble economy. The stock market and real estate prices soared to unbelievable heights. Money was cheap and easy to borrow. Everyone seemed to be getting rich. For the Yakuza, this was the best of times. They were perfectly positioned to take advantage of the speculative frenzy. With their deep connections in real estate and finance, they made astronomical amounts of money. They acted as brokers for risky land deals, using their muscle to evict stubborn tenants or clear land for development. Banks were often willing to lend them huge sums of money with few questions asked. During the bubble years, the Yakuza became more visible and brazen than ever before. They drove flashy European cars, wore expensive designer suits, and spent lavishly in the high-end entertainment districts of Ginza and Roppongi. They were seen as celebrities in some circles. The lines between the criminal underworld and the legitimate world blurred even further. It was an open secret that many of the biggest deals being made had Yakuza involvement. They were the ultimate insiders, profiting immensely from the soaring economy. Their influence seemed to be at its absolute peak. They were no longer in the shadows. They were basking in the neon glare of prosperity. But all bubbles must burst. In the early 1990s, the Japanese stock market crashed and real estate prices plummeted. The party was over. The easy money disappeared overnight. The Yakuza, who had borrowed heavily to finance their speculative deals, were hit hard. The loans they had taken out were now impossible to repay. The assets they held were suddenly worth a fraction of their former value. The banks that had once been so friendly now wanted their money back. The Yakuza were caught in a massive debt trap. and their once lucrative schemes dried up. The collapse of the bubble economy had another major consequence. It exposed the deep ties between the Yakuza and the legitimate business world. As banks and companies went bankrupt, investigations revealed just how much money had been flowing to organized crime. The public was shocked and outraged. The media was filled with stories of scandals involving Yakuza, bankers, and politicians. The government could no longer turn a blind eye. The Yakuza's high visibility during the bubble years now came back to haunt them. They had become too powerful and too public, and the resulting backlash would change everything for them. The public outrage following the collapse of the bubble economy. Well, it really forced the government to take strong action. The cozy relationship between the police, politicians, and the Yakuza could no longer be tolerated. In 1992, Japan passed a landmark piece of legislation, the Act for the Prevention of Unlawful Activities by Boryokudan members, which is commonly known as the Anti-Boryokudan Law. Now, A, meaning violent groups, is actually the legal term the police use for the Yakuza. This law was honestly a game changer. For the first time, it officially designated the major Yakuza syndicates as criminal organizations. That made it much easier for police to target their activities. The 1992 law made many of the Yakuza's traditional money-making activities illegal. Things like, that's corporate racketeering, and demanding protection money were now explicitly outlawed. The law also gave police the power to issue injunctions to stop gangsters from shaking down businesses or fighting over turf. It even made it harder for Yakuza members to open bank accounts, get loans, or rent apartments. The goal here was to cut off their sources of income and isolate them from society. It was, really, the first serious nationwide effort to dismantle the Yakuza's business empire. The law was a direct assault on the Yakuza's way of life. The law was strengthened in the years that followed, and one of the most significant updates made it possible to hold the top boss of a syndicate liable for the damages caused by his underlings. If a low-level gangster from the Yamaguchi-gumi extorted money from a shopkeeper, the shopkeeper could now sue not just the gangster, but the head of the entire organization, like Kazuo Taoka or his successors. This was a huge blow to the system. Bosses became much more reluctant to have their members engage in violent or obvious criminal acts because it could now cost them personally, both in prison time and financially. These laws, followed by prefectural ordinances in the 2010s that made it illegal for any citizen or company to knowingly do business with the Yakuza, had a devastating effect. Suddenly, the Yakuza were radioactive. Companies that had once paid them for protection now cut all ties, fearing legal trouble. Banks closed their accounts. Even small businesses refused to deal with them. The laws didn't make being a Yakuza member illegal, but they made it almost impossible to function in Japanese society. The Yakuza were being systematically starved of money and pushed further to the margins of society, a place they had not been for decades. Yakuza history is written in blood. While they often present themselves as honorable outlaws, the reality is a story of violent feuds over money, territory, and pride. These conflicts, or sajti, have erupted throughout their history, turning city streets into battlefields. One of the most notorious regions for gang violence has always been Kyushu, the southernmost of Japan's main islands. In the 1960s and 70s, cities like Fukuoka and Kitakyushu were rocked by brutal wars between local gangs and the expanding Yamaguchi-gumi from Kobe. These weren't just fistfights. They involved guns, grenades, and car bombs. Civilians were often caught in the crossfire. The violence wasn't limited to Kyushu. The major cities of Honshu, like Osaka and Tokyo, have seen their share of bloodshed. Turf wars are a constant threat. A new gang trying to set up shop in another group's territory is a classic trigger for conflict. Disputes can also start over control of lucrative businesses, like drug trafficking or loan sharking. Sometimes, all it takes is a perceived insult. A drunken insult in a bar between two low-level members can escalate until bosses are demanding satisfaction. Pride and face are incredibly important in the Yakuza world, and a slight against the organization cannot be ignored. The weapons used in these wars have become more deadly over time. In the early days, conflicts were often settled with swords and knives. But after World War II, guns became more common. Handguns, often smuggled from the United States or the Philippines, became the weapon of choice. The violence reached a peak in the 1980s. During the infamous Yamaichi War, which we'll discuss more later, firefights became a regular occurrence in residential neighborhoods. The police response was massive, but they often struggled to contain the violence once a full-blown war had started. These conflicts shattered the Yakuza's self-cultivated image of being a necessary evil that only harmed other criminals. These wars had a clear pattern. They would often start with the assassination of a boss or a high-ranking member. This would be followed by a series of retaliatory hits from the other side. The violence would spiral until one side was either wiped out, absorbed by the other, or until a truce was negotiated by a neutral party. These truces were fragile. The hatred and desire for revenge could simmer for years, waiting for the right moment to explode again. For the police and the public, these wars were a terrifying reminder of the violence lurking just beneath the surface of Japan's famously safe society. For much of the late 20th century, the Yakuza world was dominated by three massive syndicates. Their power and influence dwarfed all other groups. The largest and most powerful of these has always been the Yamaguchi-gumi, based in Kobe. Founded in 1915 as a small group of dock workers, it grew into a corporate behemoth under the leadership of its third boss, Kazuo Taoka. At its peak, the Yamaguchi-gumi had tens of thousands of members and was involved in nearly every type of criminal and legitimate enterprise imaginable. It was, for all intents and purposes, the IBM of organized crime in Japan. Its sheer size and influence made it the dominant force. The second major player is the Sumiyoshi Kai, based in Tokyo. It is not a single pyramid-like organization like the Yamaguchi-gumi, but rather a federation of smaller gangs. This structure makes it more flexible, but also sometimes harder to control. The Sumiyoshi Kai has traditionally been the Yamaguchi-gumi's main rival for control of Tokyo, the richest prize in Japan. The balance of power between these two groups has defined the landscape of organized crime for decades. When they are at peace, the underworld is relatively calm. When they fight, the whole country feels the tremors. The third major group is the Inagawa Kai, also based in the Tokyo area. While smaller than the other two, it is still a powerful and influential organization. Founded by Kakuji Inagawa, it has often acted as a key player and sometimes a mediator in disputes between the other two giants. The leadership of these three syndicates is crucial for maintaining peace. The bosses, or of these groups, have immense power. Their decisions can start or end wars. A wise and diplomatic leader can forge alliances and keep his members in line. A reckless or ambitious leader can plunge the entire underworld into chaos. Rivalries between these groups are intense and long-standing. They compete for territory, for money, and for prestige. However, full-scale war between the big three is rare because it would be mutually destructive. It's bad for business. Instead, they often engage in a kind of Cold War, with occasional skirmishes and a constant struggle for influence. They maintain a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and truces. The police spend a great deal of time and resources simply monitoring the relationships between these top syndicates, knowing that a shift in the balance of power could lead to a wave of violence across the country. The greatest threat to a Yakuza syndicate often comes not from its rivals, but from within. Internal power struggles and succession disputes have led to some of the bloodiest conflicts in Yakuza history. The most famous and destructive of these was the Yamaichi War, which raged from 1985 to 1989. The conflict began after the death of the Yamaguchi-gumi's charismatic third boss, Kazuo Taoka. A dispute over who should succeed him split the organization in two. One faction, loyal to the chosen successor, remained the Yamaguchi-gumi. The other, led by a powerful boss named Hiroshi Yamamoto, broke away to form the Ichiwa Kai. The Yamaichi War was a nationwide bloodbath. There were over 300 violent incidents, including shootings, bombings, and assassinations. The fighting was not confined to back alleys. It spilled out into public spaces, terrifying the public. One of the most shocking events was the assassination of the Yamaguchi-gumi's fourth boss, Masahisa Takenaka, in a hail of gunfire in front of his mistress's apartment in Osaka. This attack, carried out by the Ichiwa Kai, led to a brutal wave of revenge killings. The war finally ended when the Ichiwa Kai, worn down by arrests and constant attacks, dissolved. The Yamaguchi-gumi had won, But the conflict had cost them dearly in lives, money, and public image. History repeated itself in 2015. The Yamaguchi-gumi, under its sixth-generation leader Shinobu Tsukasa, experienced another major split. A large faction, dissatisfied with Tsukasa's leadership and his focus on bosses from his home organization, the Kodokai, broke away to form the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. This schism once again raised fears of a new gang war. While the violence has not reached the levels of the Yamaichi War, there have been numerous clashes, including the ramming of trucks into buildings and the murder of high-ranking members. The police have been on high alert, making hundreds of arrests to try and keep a lid on the conflict. These splits show the inherent instability of the Yakuza power structure. The system demands absolute loyalty, but personal ambition and disagreements over money can easily shatter it. When a syndicate gets too big, it becomes difficult for one leader to keep all the powerful sub-bosses happy. These internal conflicts are devastating for the organizations. They drain resources, lead to police crackdowns, and weaken the syndicate against its external rivals. The recent splits in the Yamaguchi-gumi, combined with the pressure from the anti-Yakuza laws, have severely weakened what was once the most feared criminal organization in Japan. The 21st century has not been kind to the Yakuza. The combination of the tough anti-Yakuza laws, an aging membership, and a changing society has sent the gangs into a steep decline. Their numbers have plummeted. At their peak in the 1960s, there were an estimated 184,000 Yakuza members. By the beginning of 2024, the National Police Agency reported that number had fallen to a record low of around 20,400. The organizations are shadows of their former selves. The old sources of income have dried up, and recruiting young members is harder than ever. Young people today have other options and are not drawn to the harsh, disciplined life of a gangster. In response to this pressure, the Yakuza have been forced to adapt their tactics. They have moved into new, more sophisticated areas of crime. They are heavily involved in cybercrime, such as phishing and online fraud. They have also found new ways to get around the financial regulations, using front companies and complex transactions to launder money. Some have even tried to profit from Japan's nuclear cleanup and Olympic construction projects, though with less success than in the past. They have become more fragmented and less visible. The era of the flashy, high-profile gangster is over. The modern Yakuza operates in the dark. Society's view of the Yakuza has also changed dramatically. The romantic image of the chivalrous outlaw is gone. Today they are seen by the vast majority of Japanese people as nothing more than a dangerous public menace. The passed by local governments have made them social pariahs. These laws make it illegal for any ordinary citizen or business to associate with them. A Yakuza member can't open a bank account, get a credit card, rent an apartment, or even sign up for a gym membership. This social and economic isolation makes it extremely difficult to live as a Yakuza, and it pushes many members to leave the life. Despite their decline, the Yakuza have not completely disappeared. They remain a subject of fascination in popular culture in movies, manga, and video games. The image of the tattooed warrior living by a code of honor is a powerful one, even if it is mostly a myth. The real Yakuza, however, face a bleak future. They are an aging, shrinking, and impoverished force. They are struggling to survive in a society that no longer has any tolerance for them. While it's too early to write their obituary, the sun is clearly setting on the Japanese underworld. Their era of power and influence has come to an end.